Hello, my friends. I just wanted to drop some special bonus episodes into the feed that you probably have not heard unless you are a part or an early part of the Patreon for the Life Shift podcast. If you don't know, I do have a Patreon. It currently only has two tiers. One is a $3 a month tier just to support what I'm doing, helps cover production costs. And then there's a $5 tier, which will get you episodes early and just the, I guess, warm fuzzies for helping me out with the Life Shift podcast. But I used to have other tiers where people were so generous and were offering additional money each month to get bonus episodes and possible winnings of t-shirts and all sorts of things. And then I realized a couple months ago that I wasn't able to deliver what I wanted to, especially for those of you that were giving me the extra money. So right now we're just kind of doing the early episodes. You'll always get those. So if you want to support the Life Shift podcast, please jump over to patreon.com/the Life Shift podcast, and you can find that information there. But I come on here because I want to share a series of these bonus episodes that I did early on in the Patreon journey. There are like 20 plus episodes in which I had bonus recordings with previous guests. So I would go back and we would have a conversation about the experience of sharing their story on the Life Shift podcast, catch up on anything. And I think these are super important. And I know most of them did not see the light of day from outside of the Patreon. So I'm going to be dropping these episodes. Whatever you're listening to now is another episode. So I'm going to use the same intro for all of them. But here is one of the bonus episodes with a former guest from the Life Shift podcast. And if you like this, let me know because I'm thinking of bringing some of this back and talking to previous guests as I go into year 4. So enjoy this bonus episode that was once released on the Patreon feed. I'm Matt Gilhooly, and this is The Life Shift, candid conversations about the pivotal moments that have changed lives forever. Today, I am joined by my friend Alex, and Alex, you were episode 9, I think.
9. Okay. Yeah. I meant to tell you before we started that I forgot what number it was.
Yeah, it was so long ago, and you were part of the group. I think really you may have been recording, or we may have recorded it before I launched, or right around the time that I launched the podcast itself in March of last year. It was pretty close to the time period in which this was all just kind of a school project, and I didn't know where it was going to go. And now I've recorded, by the time that this comes out, probably close to 60 episodes. But at this
Oh,
point,
awesome.
yeah, I've recorded a 50 plus, and I've released 40 something. And so we're finding that groove. So I appreciate that you came on and trusted me enough. People have told me all about how they enjoyed your story. So before we get any further, maybe you can just kind of remind us of what your episode was about.
We were touching base about this before because I couldn't fully remember because it was like it was one of those things where like I was trying to figure out a moment and it had something to do with some pivotal moment that music played in my life. And I think the original idea was when I got my first guitar, but then as we talked more and more, it seemed like it was coming down to when I saw the Monkees on TV when I was like really, really young. But one of those two things. And then we just kind of explored all the different ways that music has sort of like helped shape my relationships and the trajectory of my life in different ways, whether it was playing it, listening to it, teaching about it, whatever.
Yeah, you know what was interesting about your episode is I noticed that it seemed like in your life there were parts of you that were trying to like do what was quote unquote expected of you that wasn't in music, and somehow music always kind of brought you back to
Oh
it.
yeah, every time, like it's like an anchor or something like that. It just I should have learned probably sooner to just quit, cut out all the outside noise and follow that a little bit more, I think. In fact, there's been like a couple times since then where I will say like after doing that episode with you, I started being a little bit more like aware of when something involving music was factoring into my life decisions and stuff like that. And there's been a couple more instances since then that I trace back to that. And it's just interesting to see it pop up even in ways I wouldn't think.
Well, I mean, I've heard other people talk about, saying all these things out loud is quite different than thinking of like the little chunks of time and kind of stringing together this story or this conversation about it. People are like, I didn't really realize the impact that that particular piece had on all these other moments. So I'm not surprised that by sharing that story that now you're thinking about it more and thinking how everything connects. I mean, I like that. I think that's hopefully been beneficial for you in a way.
Oh,
Um,
totally. It's like
was
therapy, you
Yeah,
know? Like, I think it's one of the genuinely, like, one of the benefits of therapy is that, like, sometimes there's all this stuff floating around your head. You just say it out loud to someone, and you're like, "Oh, yeah, that was, like, painfully obvious. Why don't I, like, act on that now?" So it just kinda takes all the jumble and puts it into, trajectory.
it's so I don't know if you can relate to this, but sometimes I'll be thinking of something and it seems so very dramatic in my head, and then I'll verbalize it to someone else, and I'll be like, "Wait a second, that sounds very
Small.
inconsequential."
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, or that happens a lot, or also, like, it's almost like my brain has figured out something before I've realized that it figured it out. So I'll like have all this information. I'll be like, man, I just don't know what to do. And then I'll just like say it out loud and they go, oh, well, that's what I should do. You know, like it's all
It's
so
clearly written right in what
yeah,
you're
yeah.
saying. Yeah.
Yep.
I understand that. You may be different in this particular question than some of my other guests. Some of my other guests have never done a podcast or never really heard themselves on a microphone of some sort. When you listened to your episode, was there anything that stood out to you, or was it a weird experience, or was it just kind of like, oh yeah,
No, it was kind of what we were just saying. It was interesting to hear it back and to like I think as we were talking, I found more and more instances of like, oh, I wouldn't have had this relationship in my life if it wasn't for music. If I wouldn't have had, wouldn't have turned left at this juncture in my life if it wasn't for it. And then I was able to verbalize that better when I, so I've always had this back and forth with my dad in particular about like because he was very much like the one, and we talked about this in the episode too about like be a doctor or a lawyer or whatever. Don't follow these creative things. And then just recently, I saw his brother. I was up north visiting some family, and I saw his brother, who I've always gotten along with really well, but he kind of like weirdly like launched into me. Like it was just he and I in a room at one point eating food, and he was kind of going like, "Hey, like I saw that you and your brother, you're making these music videos. They look like they take a lot of work. It doesn't take a lot of work and time." And I was like, "Oh yeah, yeah, like it's a lot of work." Not knowing where he was heading with it. And then he was like, "Well, like shouldn't you be putting that into your career, or like shouldn't you be putting that into whatever? Like, why are you putting that into making these things if it's you know?" And as a result of sort of reflecting on our conversation, I had all this like ammo at the ready where I was like, dude, like I wouldn't have my job if I hadn't been doing things like this my whole life. I wouldn't have my wife. I wouldn't have a close relationship with my brother. Like depending on where you're placing value. I mean, even if you put the value solely on money, I wouldn't have a career or my current career if it wasn't for music, and I wouldn't have the money that I have made from music. But besides that, like it was almost kind of flipping the table on him. Like, don't you think it's important to be close to your family? Don't you think these other relationships are important? And those would not exist for me if it wasn't for music. So
yeah. So
I
you
don't
got
know.
ammo. You
I,
had
I yeah yeah.
Now you have the
Uh,
backup. You have all the proof written down, like you did your research paper. Your dissertation is done.
yeah yeah. And what is life experience for if not to weaponize against your relatives?
Exactly, especially at like holiday gatherings and things like that. You
Oh,
can
for sure. Yeah.
uh,
I think there was definitely a part of me that was wishing like I had been able to say all of that to like my dad 20 years ago or something. You know what I mean?
Speaking of that, did I don't know if any of your friends or family listened to your episode. Did you get any feedback from others that happened to take a listen to your story? And
It's I didn't ask a whole lot because I feel I get in my head about stuff like that. I'm like, don't tell me if you liked it or not, like or whatever, or just tell me you liked something if because otherwise I'll think myself into circles. But yeah, generally speaking, I had a few people that I didn't even know listened. That people we know through work or whatever that had said they really enjoyed the story and found the episode interesting and everything. So people that tend to be, I think, probably creatively minded that have probably heard similar things in their lives. Definitely. Even my wife said there were a couple things in there that she hadn't heard before, so that was cool.
I would imagine that some of our coworkers listened and it kind of filled in some of maybe some of the gaps that they were not aware of, or kind of how that journey brought you to where we currently work. And, I guess I would be remiss if I didn't mention that your brother was also on an episode of the show with a very different story, but also very related to music in a way as well, of how music saved his life, in a more traumatic or a, a bigger way
A
than
deeper
maybe
way,
yours.
yeah,
Yeah, a
probably
deeper
so,
way.
or maybe like a more literal way. Like I don't think any of my traumatic life moments were actually like life threatening in the ways that if anyone hasn't listened to his episode, he had some really intense struggles with alcohol that got really really bad for a while, and I think like our our relationship and his relationship with his friends and then music itself kind of like helped. It was one of the tools that he used to help pull himself out of that and get sober and stuff.
And how drums essentially, getting into drumming again and more so, kind of is his outlet, is the place where he feels centered and connected, which I thought it was really interesting to have both of your conversations, because you both mentioned the pressure. I don't know if pressure is the right word, but the your father's desires for both of you growing up, and it was interesting to hear the perspectives as it relates to music and kind of doing what society tells us to do. So that was that was certainly interesting to hear.
Yeah, it's I mean, people talk about it being therapy, but then to actually like, it's one of those cliche phrases. But then when I started thinking about it more that way and seeing him use it that way too, it helps you. Like, I didn't get diagnosed with this until I got older, but like I have ADHD, and once I started learning more about what that actually means and how you're sort of starting at a deficiency of dopamine, like it's harder for you to collect it, and you have less of it than what other people might have. And when I was really struggling with like some frustrations and depressive states that I'd come in and out of and everything, I made a list of the various things that I noticed that I got like just a huge dopamine surge from. And some of them are obvious. It's like exercise or whatever. I found that like doing a 20 or 30-minute workout, I could get the same like mental buzz and kind of lift myself out of it just by playing the guitar for a few minutes. Like if I just grabbed the guitar, felt the way that the strings kind of vibrated, played along with the song or two or something like that. And almost always that 5 minutes would turn into an hour or something like that. But so now I kind of keep a list handy of like, these are the activities to do if I notice my brain is sort of like in a rut. These are things that are necessary to my existence that will lift me back up pretty quickly usually too. So just being more conscious of that stuff has been helpful.
I mean, that's a great idea, especially for creatives. I think creatives, they can relate to your story. They can relate to how something brought it back, or kind of actually built your life, right? Like music really created what you're doing in your life and the people that surround you, and the things you love to do. And I think some creatives can relate to that and maybe aren't as fortunate, but in your sense that if you can keep, if it keeps drawing you back, you may want to lean into it because there might be something that can, kind of work together to create a better life. Like we talked about in your episode, what was interesting is, you had your music career in which that was your career. Like you were creating music, you were touring, you were doing a lot more, right? Like that was your main focus. But now that you've come back to music at an older age after doing other things, it allows you to create music for the sake of creating music, right? Like more of a passion and doing what you want, rather than this record label wants us to do this, or music or radio's telling me it has to be this way. Are you still finding that in your, since we recorded, like you've done more with your current band, are you still finding that ability to do it for what you want to do it for?
Yeah, yeah. There's always kind of like a pressure that I think is just, it's kind of just baked into our society in general. Everybody struggles with this on social media and stuff too, where there's always kind of like a, well, it doesn't mean anything unless it gets to this number of likes or follows or whatever. And I've definitely noticed a change in myself in terms of like letting a lot of that go. And I think it kind of goes to what I was saying before. Like now, when I think about band practice, or I think about like going to make a music video, or whatever it is that we're doing, I would say I'm more at like 70 to 80% thinking about it of like I get to go burn off some negative energy. I get to go like just kind of make something with my friends, and it's a lot healthier, I think. Whereas I'm sure if I had a time machine and I went back to like, practices when I was 19 and 20 years old, I I'm willing to bet there's just a dark cloud hanging over the whole thing because of the external pressure of like, what is this going to turn into? It's not going to matter if it doesn't make us money. It's not going to matter unless it gets to this achievement level or whatever it might be. And yeah, being able to sort of like go like if that happens, it happens. But I've seen enough stories of just random people, something blowing up that doesn't deserve to blow up, or the other way around, somebody works really hard and they slip through the cracks. Like you kind of embrace the fact that it's a game of chance more than it is anything else a lot of times. And yeah, I think that kind of freed up some pressure that I was putting, whether I was putting it on myself or whether it was coming from stuff that was baked into me as a kid. It was there.
Well, I think part of it too, like your earlier career when you were doing more touring and you were doing more of that, trying to make that a full time, there was a pressure to be successful. Probably one, right? That you have to pay the bills, but also your family is telling you like this is probably not, like you're not going to make a ton of money. So I think there is that natural pressure. But now you have a job and you can do this. And if it hits big, it hits big. If it doesn't and it serves the purpose, like you said, of kind of getting out that energy, getting good energy, working with your friends and your brother, I think there's a lot of benefit in that. And I think creatives can relate to that. I mean, I always think about the podcast too, right? All it takes is one episode, just like all it takes is one song to hit right? And so you never know. You just keep creating, and if it's bringing you joy as you do it, then if it does, then it's a win-win. O Otherwise, it's just a win.
Right. And it's also, if you're doing it that way, like if you're just making what you love and doing it because you love it, then if it does hit, you haven't stuck yourself in a situation where you got to keep making things that maybe you were making for the wrong reasons before, where we've like, that was something that kind of happened with the band that I was in my like early 20s, was that we had this like EP that kind of blew up underground in the pop punk circles of that era. And we almost felt, probably some of us more than others, but you almost felt committed to like, we have to make more music like that, even if that's not where our head is at the moment. And, like if you're just making for the sake of making stuff, it keeps you from falling into that trap, I think.
Well, yeah, and then you can possibly start to resent it, like, and then you lose the love for the act of creating itself. So, I mean, I think your story shared that, like, where you're at is a pretty cool place for a creative standpoint, right? Like, sure, I'm sure you'd love to be a millionaire because of your music, but at the same time, you're still able to enjoy the things you want to do, but also pay the bills with your real job that is still related to music. So, you know, it's kind of like you found that nice space, or at least what appears to be a comfortable space.
Absolutely. It allows me to focus on other aspects of music too that I probably like. If I was only making music all the time, I don't know that I would even have the time, or yeah, I just may not have had the time to jump into some of my other obsessions, like getting, because I'm super into music history now. I really like seeing how like artistic movements shape culture and things like that too. And it's made me, a lot more aware of those kinds of things. Whereas if I was just chasing, like we have to write a quote unquote hit or something like that, I'd probably be stuck in just listening to the same thing over and over again, trying to copy it. And it's not a place I really want to be anyway.
I know you do listen to a lot of podcasts, one to find out more music history and stuff. Is there a particular like kind of story that you are gravitated or you gravitate towards when you're listening to other podcasts?
I'm huge into comedy in particular.
I'm
That's like,
shocked.
and I don't know if that came from, yeah, if that came from the monkeys as well. Cause I know that like when I first saw them, part of what I was so fascinated by was that it was like musicians that were really like having a good time with each other and like making jokes, and like that was just as appealing to me as the music side of it was. So yeah, most of my podcast stuff, I don't know. I have at my core, I think this is probably again true of a lot of creative people. There's sort of like this, what is it? I don't know. It might just be sadness or something. There's something sort of fragile down there, and I also am extremely empathetic to potentially like a negative degree. I would say like I could, let's say I'm watching a movie or something that has, I don't know, what's a big trigger for me? Like torture. Like if something bad is happening to someone who is helpless or an animal that is helpless, yeah, I'm talking like it could literally be years that I'll be thinking about that. It'll send me like into a spiral. Like I can barely handle stuff like that. My point in saying this is that when I go to external media, I'm always looking for uplifting, funny, like happy. Like I can't really dwell in sad emotions too long because it's already there. So I'm like, I've already dealt with a lot of that, and I don't need more of that. So that being said, I if it's just people having funny conversations, or I also really like hearing the process behind creating comedy from funny people. And then I do a lot, similar stuff from music. I like hearing the life circumstances of musicians from the past and stuff. So yeah.
That history element is
Hmm.
interesting to you.
Disgraceland in particular. I don't know if you've ever heard that. I think we talked about that briefly, but that one's really interesting.
It's not the areas that I go into. I lean
Hmm.
into that, like, "Tell me your
Yeah,
saddest story,"
I
and
know.
and I will eat that up. But the thing is, I listen to a lot of true crime, and people are like, "Oh, how do you listen to, murder and crimes?" And I'm like, "You realize that the true crime shows are not really about the actual murder, and they're not really about the crime, they're a puzzle." Like, that's what I listen to because I wanna hear how things came together and, we figured out how to solve the issue. So, I always think there's, like, this mis it's not aligned with what people think true crime is with what it
Hmm.
actually is, but that's kind
Oh
of
yeah,
my
yeah.
space.
My wife is super into like I'll walk by the TV and she's watching another cult thing or another murder or whatever, and I totally get that. It's I think even if it's not the focal point, if I heard the details of one of those murders, though, I can't get out of that space to proceed to the puzzle. I also don't like puzzles. I'm like, just show me a finished picture. I don't want to think about how it was put together.
Hey,
But
there's a podcast for everyone.
yeah. That being said, though, I think that's what I get out of diving into music history is that you see a lot of people see the tail end result of a movement. It's like, oh, whatever, grunge in Seattle in 1990. I like looking at like all the different personalities that led into that. Like, where did it come from? What were they reacting to? What did it launch? Like I like seeing all the kind of moving pieces there. I was about to say, and then nobody gets killed, but then I thought of the grunge scene, and then like everybody's dead.
Not just the grunge scene. I mean, we got all sorts of musicians that have died in not so great ways. So, to wrap this up, I think, I like to ask, is there anything there's someone, out there that wants to share their story or wants to put something out there or is thinking about it? Is there anything that you could say to someone that's maybe a little bit hesitant to do it of the value of sharing your story with other people?
Yeah, probably what we were saying earlier is that it may help you more than you realize. Like you might be thinking of it as like you're afraid to come out on a platform or talk openly about something like that because of I don't know whatever people fear, external judgment, speaking in public, whatever it might be. But sometimes just getting it out of your head and into the world, it might help you like function a little bit better too. Um, and then yeah, I think like for people like us that are interested in other people's stories, we start to see ourselves in it. Might give us advice. I know, some of the episodes of your podcast that I listen to, like a lot of them were people we knew. Obviously, I listen to my brothers, and it's really interesting to hear, like, to humanize someone in that way. I mean, he's someone that I'm very close with. I know him really well, but I learned things in that episode that I wouldn't have heard otherwise because just the nature of our relationship, certain things he wouldn't have even thought to tell me probably, but going through that process puts him out there and it helps me understand him a little bit better. So, yeah, it's beneficial. I'd say a lot more good comes out of it than bad.
Yeah, I would agree. And if it was bad, I wouldn't put it out there in public.
Exactly.
I
Yeah,
think that
yeah.
would
I
be
can't
wrong.
even think of what bad would be.
Yeah, I've even had I had someone that the episode came out in January of this year, and she was going to come on and talk about, her cancer diagnosis. She had multiple cancer diagnoses, and she was going to come on, and she came on to this recording where we do the remote recording, and she was like, "I've been listening to a couple of these episodes, and I'd like to share a story that I've never told anyone in public. I've never told anyone outside of my family. Can I do that?" And I was like, "Yes." Because you just like you said, you never know, like, how a portion of your story will resonate with someone at that particular moment in time that they're listening. It might not even be the big chunk. It could just be some throwaway sentence that you thought was a throwaway sentence that really connected with them. So, I'm just so grateful that all of you so far have, shared your stories in all different ways, and yours is a more uplifting one. We have some, sadder ones, but I appreciate it because there is a story for everyone. There's a podcast for everyone. So thank you for being a part of that. And thank you for being a part of this.
For sure. Yeah, my pleasure. I think it's a really cool thing that you're doing. I love like just connecting. Yeah, being able to seek those things and find them through other people's stories. It's kind of what the whole all of life is. Dun dun dun. Yeah.
We need to learn from each other. And the only way we can do that is share what we've experienced. And sometimes that's really crappy things that we've learned from, or sometimes it's really awesome things that we can kind of emulate from other people. So, thank you for being a part of it. And thank you all for listening on the Patreon subscriber feed. For more information, please visit www.thelifeshiftpodcast.com.